If this book found you, it did not find you by accident. There are 1,000 different spiritual teachers, all contradicting each other. And the more you search for answers, the more confused you feel. Then I found a teaching within Dharmic philosophy that finally connected all the dots. And I put everything into this audiobook so you don't have to spend years searching like I did. The Law of Dharma. Introduction. The word Dharma comes from the Sanskrit root dri, meaning to uphold, to sustain, to hold in place. In the Vedic tradition, one of the oldest and most comprehensive spiritual and philosophical systems ever developed by the human mind, Dharma was not a concept confined to religion or morality. It was understood as the fundamental ordering principle of existence itself, the law that holds the cosmos together, the intelligence embedded in the structure of reality that assigns to every particle, every being, every soul a specific nature, a specific role, and a specific contribution without which the whole would be, in some irreducible way, incomplete. The ancient Egyptians expressed this truth through the concept of ma'at, the divine law of cosmic order, truth, and rightness. To live in alignment with ma'at was not merely to be virtuous. It was to occupy your precise place in the architecture of creation, to fulfill the function for which your particular soul had been given form. The Chinese tradition spoke of the Tao, the way of things, the natural current of the universe, and taught that the deepest human wisdom lay not in forcing one's way through life, but in discovering and moving with one's own essential nature. The Buddhist tradition identified Dharma as the cosmic law and order underlying all of reality, the truth the Buddha himself realized beneath the Bodhi tree, and then spent his remaining decades teaching others to find. Across cultures, across centuries, across the full breadth of human spiritual inquiry, the same understanding kept surfacing, expressed in different languages through different metaphors, but pointing with remarkable consistency toward a single extraordinary claim. You were not born without purpose. You were born as purpose. Every soul that incarnates into physical existence carries within it a unique vibrational signature, a specific set of gifts, a particular quality of consciousness, and a precise contribution that only it, in all the vast expanse of creation, is equipped to make. This is your Dharma, not a role assigned to you from the outside by a distant authority, not a career path or a personality type or a list of productive activities, but the living, breathing truth of what you most essentially are and what the world most essentially needs from you. And here is what most people are never told. The Dharmic law is not a passive truth. It is an active cosmic force. When you are aligned with your Dharma, when your choices, your gifts, your actions, and your deepest sense of self are moving in the same direction, something extraordinary happens. The friction of life decreases. The right doors open. The right people appear. The energy required to move forward feels proportionate, even energizing rather than exhausting and depleting. The ancient Chinese called this Wu Wei, effortless action in harmony with the natural flow of things. The Vedic sages called it Ritambara Pragya, the mind that moves in alignment with the intelligence of the cosmos. Every tradition that has ever engaged deeply with the principle of Dharma has identified the same unmistakable signature of a soul living in accordance with its true nature, a quality of rightness, of flow, of being precisely where you are meant to be, doing precisely what you were always designed to do. And when you are not aligned with your Dharma, when you are living a life that belongs to someone else's expectations, someone else's blueprint, or your own fear rather than your soul's genuine truth, the law makes itself known in the only way a cosmic law can, through persistent, patient, increasingly insistent feedback, through the ache you cannot name, through the success that feels hollow, through the life that looks correct from the outside but feels, from the inside, like wearing someone else's clothes. You do not need to be a mystic to understand this law. You do not need a guru, a lineage, or years of spiritual practice. What you need is exactly what you already have. The willingness to look honestly at your own life, to take seriously the quiet voice that has always known something more is possible, and to consider that the universe has always been far more precisely designed, far more intimately intelligent, and far more deeply invested in your fulfillment than you were ever taught to believe. By the time you finish this book, you will not simply know about Dharma as a concept. You will understand the law that makes it real. You will see your gifts not as accidents, but as assignments. You will understand your struggles not as evidence of failure, but as the precise friction through which your true nature is being revealed. And you will begin to recognize, perhaps for the first time with complete clarity, the thread that has been running through every chapter of your life, quietly pointing you home. The ancient keepers of Dharmic wisdom did not preserve these teachings across thousands of years because they were interesting philosophies. They preserved them because they worked. Because generation after generation of human beings who stopped running from their own nature and started moving toward it found that their lives began, sometimes slowly and sometimes with startling speed, to transform. Chapter 1. The Law of Dharma, what it is and why it governs everything. There is a question that the human soul has been asking since the first moment it became capable of asking questions at all. Why am I here? Not in the existential sense of despair, not the hollow why of a person who has lost their faith in the meaningfulness of existence, but the genuine, searching, urgent why of a soul that senses, however dimly, that its presence in this particular body at this particular moment in history is not an accident. That there is something it was placed here to do, to be, to contribute. That somewhere beneath the noise of daily life, beneath the accumulated weight of other people's expectations and its own unexamined fears, there is a signal, clear, consistent, and waiting to be heard. The Dharmic Law is the cosmic framework that answers that question. Not abstractly, not philosophically, but with the precision and the intimacy of a law that knows your soul's history, your specific gifts, and your particular place in the unfolding of creation more completely than you currently know yourself. The ancient understanding. The Sanskrit word dharma appears for the first time in the Rig Veda, among the oldest sacred texts in human history, composed between 4,000 and 5,000 years ago by the Vedic seers known as the Rishis. These were not philosophers in the modern academic sense. They were what the ancient world called seers, human beings who had, through sustained contemplative practice, developed the capacity to perceive directly the laws governing the structure of reality. What they wrote down was not speculation, it was observation. The record of what they saw when they looked clearly at the nature of existence, without the distorting filters of cultural conditioning, ego, or fear. What they saw was this: everything that exists has a nature, and that nature is not arbitrary. The sun has a dharma. The law of its being is to radiate light and heat. The river has a dharma. Its nature is to flow, to nourish, to find the sea. The seed has a dharma. It is coded from the moment of its existence to become a specific kind of tree and nothing else. A mango seed does not accidentally become an oak. A river does not spontaneously decide to flow uphill. The cosmos, the Vedic seers understood, is not a collection of random objects moving in random directions. It is a precisely ordered intelligence, and every element within it, from the movement of galaxies to the beating of a single human heart, has a specific nature, a specific function, and a specific contribution to the whole. The human soul is no different. It too has a dharma, a nature so specific, so irreplaceable, and so perfectly calibrated to the needs of the world it enters, that the ancient texts described it not as something the soul must discover, but as something the soul already is, waiting to be recognized, uncovered, and lived. Dharma is not what you do. It is what you are. This is the first and most critical distinction that the Dharmic Law asks you to make. And it is a distinction that the modern world, obsessed as it is with careers, productivity, and external markers of purpose, almost universally misses. Dharma is not a job title. It is not a 5-year plan. It is not a passion project or a life mission statement. These things may be expressions of your Dharma, channels through which it flows into the world, but they are not the Dharma itself. Your Dharma is the specific quality of consciousness that you, and only you, carry. It is the particular way you see, the specific way you feel, the unique combination of gifts and wounds and wisdom that your soul has accumulated across the full arc of its evolution and that it brings, fully loaded, into this lifetime. It is not something you create, it is something you recognize. And the recognition, when it comes, carries the unmistakable quality of remembering something you always knew rather than learning something new. Deepak Chopra, who introduced the Law of Dharma to millions of Western readers through his work in the 1990s, described it as the understanding that every human being has a unique talent and a unique way of expressing it, and that when that talent is offered in service to others, it creates both personal fulfillment and universal benefit simultaneously. This framing captures something essential about the Dharmic Law. It is never purely personal. Dharma, by its very nature, is relational. It exists at the intersection of who you are and what the world needs. The gift is not complete until it is given. The nature does not fulfill itself in isolation. It fulfills itself in contact with the world that was waiting for precisely what you carry. The 3 pillars of Dharmic Law. Across every tradition that has engaged deeply with this principle, Vedic, Buddhist, Hermetic, Egyptian, and beyond, the Dharmic Law is understood to rest on 3 foundational pillars. Together, they form the complete architecture of a life lived in alignment with its deepest truth. The first pillar is the recognition of your essential self. Not the self that was shaped by your childhood, your culture, your trauma, or your triumphs, but the self that existed before all of that. The soul that chose this particular incarnation, with its specific gifts, its specific lessons, and its specific capacity to contribute. The Vedic tradition called this the Atman, the individual expression of universal consciousness. The Sufi mystics called it the Ruh, the divine breath within the human form. Whatever name it carries across traditions, the teaching is consistent. Beneath the personality, beneath the conditioning, beneath the story you have been telling about yourself since you were old enough to form one, there is a self that knows exactly what it is and exactly why it is here. The first pillar of Dharmic Law is the commitment to finding your way back to that knowing. The second pillar is the expression of your unique gifts. The cosmic law does not place a specific quality of consciousness into a soul and then expect that quality to remain unexpressed. Dharma, by its nature, moves outward. It seeks form. It seeks expression. It seeks the precise channels, whether in art or medicine, in leadership or listening, in building or healing, or simply being present in a way that makes others feel less alone, through which the specific gift of that specific soul can make contact with the world that needs it. The second pillar is the courage, and it does require courage to take your gifts seriously, to treat what comes naturally to you not as trivial or accidental, but as the precise contribution you were assembled to make. The third pillar is service. This is where the Dharmic Law distinguishes itself most clearly from the modern self-help notion of following your passion or doing what makes you happy. Dharma is not about happiness in the shallow sense of the word. It is about fulfillment in the deepest sense, the fulfillment that comes only when your gifts are directed not merely toward your own satisfaction, but toward the genuine benefit of others. The ancient law is precise on this point. A gift that remains entirely self-directed is not fully expressed Dharma. It is potential waiting to become purpose. The moment your unique contribution enters the world in service, not as performance, not as transaction, but as genuine offering, The Dharmic current that has been building behind it begins to flow. And that flow, every tradition that has ever described it confirms, feels like nothing else on earth. Why the law makes itself known through longing. There is something the Dharmic Law does when it goes unfulfilled that is worth understanding deeply, because most people have already felt it without knowing what it was. It aches, not with the sharp pain of injury or the obvious grief of loss, with something subtler and in its own way more relentless. The ache of the Dharmic Law is the ache of a soul that knows what it is capable of and has not yet been allowed to be it. It is the restlessness that no external achievement can fully satisfy. The sense of being close to something essential, without being able to quite close the distance. The feeling, at the end of days that are full by every measurable standard, that something that matters was left undone. The Sufi poet Rumi captured this with an image that has traveled across 8 centuries without losing a particle of its precision. He described the soul as a reed flute cut from its native reed bed, crying from the moment of separation, making music from the very wound of its longing, unable to rest until it finds its way back to the source from which it came. The longing, Rumi understood, is not a problem to be solved. It is a compass. It is the Dharmic Law expressing itself through the soul's own nature, pointing, always pointing toward the direction of wholeness. This is why the ache of unlived Dharma cannot be numbed permanently by any substitute. Success in the wrong direction feels like failure at a frequency the soul can always detect, no matter how convincingly the mind argues otherwise. The ancient law is patient. It does not punish. It does not abandon. But it does not stop calling. And the call, however quiet, however easy to ignore in the busyness of daily life, is always there, always pointing, always waiting for the moment when you are ready to listen. The cosmic precision of your particular gift. The Dharmic tradition makes a claim that the modern mind, trained toward skepticism about anything that cannot be measured, sometimes struggles to fully receive. And yet it is the claim at the very heart of the law. And without it, nothing else in this book makes complete sense. Your specific gifts, the things that come naturally to you, the ways of seeing and being and doing that feel effortless to you even as they appear difficult or impossible to others, the particular quality of attention you bring to the things that genuinely move you, are not random. They are not the accidents of genetics or environment, though genetics and environment are among the channels through which they are delivered. They are the precise instruments your soul assembled across the full arc of its evolution to do the specific work this incarnation was designed to do. The Vedic tradition preserved a concept called Svabhava, one's own nature, that speaks to this with particular clarity. Svabhava is the irreducible essence of what you are. The specific combination of qualities that makes you recognizably, unmistakably, irreplaceably yourself. And the Vedic understanding was that Svabhava and Dharma are not separate things. Your nature and your purpose are the same thing expressed from different angles. What you most essentially are is precisely what the world most specifically needs from you. The cosmic economy wastes nothing. No gift is assembled without a corresponding need waiting somewhere in the world to receive it. This is the breathtaking precision at the heart of Dharmic Law. You are not a generalist in the eyes of the cosmos. You are a specialist of the most extraordinary kind, a soul whose entire history of experience, growth, struggle, and evolution has been preparing you to offer something specific, irreplaceable, and necessary, not eventually. Not once you become someone better or wiser or more deserving. Now, in this lifetime, with exactly the gifts and the wounds and the hard-won wisdom you already carry. When Dharma goes unlived, the weight of the unchosen life. The ancient traditions were not sentimental about what happens when a soul consistently chooses against its Dharma. They were compassionate, but clear. And what they described, translated from Vedic and Buddhist and Hermetic frameworks, into the language of contemporary human experience, maps with uncomfortable precision onto what modern psychology has begun to call existential emptiness, chronic meaninglessness, the quiet despair of a life that has everything it was supposed to want and still cannot find its way to genuine fulfillment. When a soul consistently suppresses its essential nature, when it chooses safety over truth, when it performs the life that others expect rather than living the life its own nature requires, when it treats its deepest gifts as luxuries it cannot afford to take seriously, the Dharmic law does not punish it. But it does not relent either. The pressure of unexpressed nature does not dissipate over time. It accumulates. It finds outlets, not always healthy ones. It expresses itself as restlessness, as chronic dissatisfaction, as the particular kind of exhaustion that comes not from working too hard, but from working in the wrong direction. The Egyptian concept of Ma'at, the divine cosmic order, included its shadow counterpart, Isfet, the concept of chaos, disorder, and wrongness that results when any element of creation is displaced from its proper function. To the Egyptian mind, a soul living against its essential nature was not merely unhappy. It was, in a precise cosmic sense, contributing to disorder. The order of things required every soul to be what it was. And the soul that refused its own nature, however understandable the reasons, was participating in a kind of spiritual entropy that rippled outward beyond its individual life. This is not said to create guilt. Guilt is not a dharmic concept. The traditions that understood this law most deeply were unanimous, that the soul does not take on a life against its dharma out of malice or weakness, but out of the accumulated weight of fear, conditioning, and the very human need for approval. The law does not judge the detour. It simply keeps holding the destination open, patient and unwavering, until the soul finds its way back. The field always knows. Perhaps the most quietly radical teaching, embedded in the first principle of Dharmic law, is this one, and it is the one this chapter must ultimately rest on. The universe has always known your Dharma. The field, the same intelligent, responsive vibrational medium that the Vedic tradition called Akasha, and that the Hermetic philosophers understood as the invisible substrate of all reality, holds within it the complete record of your soul's essential nature. It knows your gifts with a completeness that you yourself may not yet have accessed. It knows the precise contribution your presence in the world is designed to make, and it has been, with all the patience that an eternal intelligence can bring to the task, organizing your experiences, your relationships, your challenges, your unexpected redirections, your moments of sudden and inexplicable clarity, to move you, increment by increment, in the direction of that contribution. Every experience that felt like a detour may have been preparation. Every loss that seemed to close a door may have been redirecting you toward the door that was actually yours. Every gift you have been reluctant to take seriously may be the precise thing the next chapter of your life, and the lives of others who need what you carry, is waiting for. You did not come to this teaching by accident. In a universe governed by the Dharmic law, nothing that genuinely matters arrives by accident. The fact that you are here now, willing to look honestly at the question of your own purpose, is itself a signal. The signal of a soul that has developed through everything it has lived through, precisely the readiness it needs to begin moving more consciously in the direction it was always designed to travel. The ancient sages, the Vedic rishis, the Egyptian initiates, the Buddhist masters, the Sufi mystics, the Hermetic philosophers, they did not preserve the wisdom of Dharmic law across thousands of years because it was a beautiful idea. They preserved it because it was true. Because every soul that stopped performing the life it thought it should have and started living the life its own nature required, found, sometimes slowly and sometimes with breathtaking speed, that the world made room for it in a way it never had before. That space is waiting for you. In the next chapter, we turn to the force that most consistently stands between a soul and its dharma. The ancient wisdom traditions called it Maya. illusion. We call it, in the language of contemporary experience, the accumulated weight of who we were told we are. And understanding how it works is the first step toward walking through it. Chapter 2. The Illusion, Maya, and the Borrowed Life. There is a version of you that was assembled by the world before you were old enough to have any say in the matter. It began earlier than you think. Before the first day of school. Before the first time someone told you to be quiet, to be realistic, to be more like your brother or less like yourself. It began in the wordless early years when you were pure sensation and response, absorbing the emotional frequencies of the people around you, the way soft earth absorbs rain, completely, indiscriminately, with no capacity yet to distinguish between what was true and what was simply being modeled for you by people who themselves had absorbed it from someone else. By the time you were old enough to ask the question, "Who am I?" the answer had already been substantially pre-written by your family, by your culture, by the religion or the absence of religion you were born into, by the particular wound your most important early relationships left in you, and the particular armor you constructed in response, by the messages, explicit and implicit, spoken and communicated through 1,000 subtle adjustments of approval and withdrawal, about what kind of person you were supposed to become. The ancient Indian philosophical tradition had a word for this. They called it Maya. And understanding Maya is not optional if you want to understand Dharma. Because Maya is precisely what stands between you and it. What Maya actually means. Maya is one of the most misunderstood concepts in all of Eastern philosophy, largely because it has been translated into English with a word that does not quite carry its full weight. The word is illusion. And the problem with that translation is that it suggests something insubstantial, a trick of light, a passing confusion, something that dissolves the moment you look at it directly. Maya is not that. Maya is not a ghost. It is not a hallucination. It is not something that has no reality at all. The Sanskrit understanding of Maya is far more precise and far more unsettling than the English word illusion implies. Maya is the mistaking of something real but partial for the whole truth. It is the human tendency, built into the structure of ordinary consciousness, reinforced by every layer of social conditioning, and defended with extraordinary tenacity by the ego that was constructed from it, to take the surface of things for their depth, to take the constructed self for the essential self, to take the role you were given for the soul you actually are. The Vedic sages who first articulated this concept were not being poetic, they were being precise. They understood that the human mind, operating from within the ordinary state of consciousness, is structurally disposed toward a particular kind of error. The error of mistaking the map for the territory. The error of confusing the costume with the person wearing it. The error that the Dharmic Law spends an entire lifetime inviting you to correct. The costume you forgot you were wearing. Here is how Maya operates in a human life, described not in the language of ancient philosophy, but in the language of lived experience that you will almost certainly recognize. You were born with a specific nature, a particular quality of attention, a specific way of engaging with the world that was, in your earliest years before the shaping began in earnest, entirely and effortlessly your own. Children who have not yet been fully inducted into the expectations of their particular culture and family system move through the world with a directness that is sometimes startling to adults who have long since lost it. They know what they love. They know what repels them. They know when they are being asked to be something other than what they are, and they resist it with a clarity that the adults around them often experience as inconvenient. Then the shaping begins. Not maliciously. Almost never maliciously. The people who shape you are, for the most part, people who love you. They are simply doing what was done to them, passing on the particular configuration of beliefs, expectations, and survival strategies that allowed them to navigate the world they knew. They teach you through 1,000 interactions too subtle to be called lessons. which parts of yourself are acceptable and which are not, which gifts are worth taking seriously and which are impractical, which desires are appropriate and which are embarrassing, which version of you is lovable and which version needs to be managed, hidden, or corrected. And you, being a child who needs love and belonging more than almost anything else, learn quickly, efficiently, with a thoroughness that would be impressive if it were not also, in the deepest sense, a loss. You learn to perform the acceptable version. You learn to lead with the gifts that are rewarded and suppress the ones that are not. You learn to want the things that make sense to the people around you and to feel vaguely ashamed of the things that do not. You learn, in short, to wear a costume, and you wear it so consistently and for so long that you eventually forget you are wearing it at all. This is Maya in its most intimate and most consequential form, not a cosmic magic trick, a human one. The slow, socially enforced replacement of your essential self with a constructed one. And the Dharmic law cannot fully operate in a life that has mistaken the costume for the soul. The three veils of Maya. The Vedic and later Hermetic traditions identified Maya operating through what they described as veils, layers of illusion that accumulate over the essential self across the course of a lifetime. Each one more subtle than the last. Each one more difficult to recognize precisely because it has been worn for so long, it feels like skin. The first veil is the veil of identity. This is the most visible layer of Maya, and the one most people encounter first when they begin any kind of serious self-inquiry. It is the story you tell about who you are, the narrative constructed from the roles you have occupied, the experiences that defined you, the labels that were applied and accepted, the wounds that shaped you, and the achievements that confirmed you. I am a mother. I am an entrepreneur. I am the responsible one. I am the one who survived. I am the one who was never quite enough. These stories are not without truth. They emerged from real experiences. But they are not the whole truth. They are the surface of the self, not its source. And a life built entirely on the surface of the self, however successful it appears, will always carry the specific hollowness of a foundation that is not quite solid. The second veil is the veil of conditioning. This is subtler and more pervasive than the first. It operates not through the stories you consciously tell about yourself, but through the assumptions so deeply embedded in your perception that you no longer experience them as assumptions at all. You experience them as reality, the belief that your particular gifts are not serious enough to build a life around, the conviction that safety matters more than truth, the unconscious equation of visibility with danger, or of desire with selfishness, or of your own authority with arrogance. These are not thoughts you chose. They are the sediment of thousands of hours of early experience, settling so deeply into the structure of your perception that they now appear not as beliefs, but as facts about the world. This is the veil that the Dharmic law most persistently and most patiently works to dissolve, because you cannot move toward your essential nature while you are operating from assumptions about yourself and the world that were formed before you had the wisdom or the experience to question them. The third veil is the veil of fear. This is the most tenacious of the three because it operates not in the mind, but in the body, in the nervous system's deeply encoded memory of every moment when being fully yourself produced consequences that felt dangerous, the criticism that landed too hard, the rejection that came too early, the environment that was too unsafe for the authentic self to survive in without modification. Fear is Maya's most powerful enforcer because it does not argue with you. It does not present reasons or make cases. It simply contracts. It simply makes the prospect of full self-expression feel, at a level beneath rational thought, like a threat to survival. And the soul that is operating from this level of contraction cannot access its Dharma, no matter how clearly it understands the concept intellectually. Understanding Dharma in the mind while fear holds the body is like knowing exactly where you want to go while the brakes are fully engaged. How Maya mimics Dharma. Here is the subtlety that the ancient teachers emphasized most carefully, and the one that trips up even sincere seekers who have been on the spiritual path for years. Maya does not always look like confusion. It does not always present itself as lostness or emptiness or obvious misalignment. Sometimes, and this is its most sophisticated form, Maya presents itself as purpose, as a compelling story about who you are and what you are here to do that feels meaningful, that generates genuine energy, that looks from the outside like a person living their truth, but that is built, at its foundation, on the constructed self rather than the essential one. The person who has turned their wound into their entire identity and calls it their mission. The person who has built a life around being needed because the alternative, being fully themselves without the justification of usefulness, feels too exposed. The person whose ambition is indistinguishable even to themselves from the unresolved need to finally prove something to a parent who withheld approval. These are not simple failures of character. They are the sophisticated expressions of Maya wearing the clothes of purpose. And they are worth examining honestly, because the Dharmic Law operates with a precision that does not reward even the most beautifully constructed false self. The difference between Maya purpose and genuine Dharma is felt rather than thought. Genuine Dharma has a quality of rightness that does not depend on the response of others. It does not need constant external validation to feel real. It does not collapse in the absence of applause or recognition. It carries, even in moments of difficulty, even in seasons of apparent failure, an underlying current of this is what I am here for, that is self-sustaining in a way that constructed purpose never quite manages to be. Maya purpose, by contrast, requires maintenance. It needs the audience. It needs the confirmation. It produces achievement but not fulfillment, recognition but not rest, movement but not the specific quality of rightness that a soul living its genuine Dharma knows in its bones. The moment the veil begins to thin. Every tradition that has engaged with the concept of Maya is also a tradition that preserves the teaching of its dissolution, because the veils, however thick, however long worn, are not permanent. They are not the truth of what you are. They are what accumulated over the truth of what you are. And the truth, the Dharmic tradition teaches with a consistency that spans cultures and centuries, is always still there, unchanged, undiminished, waiting with the patience of something that knows it cannot be permanently buried. The moment the veil begins to thin looks different for every soul. For some it comes as crisis, the collapse of a life that was built on the constructed self, the sudden removal of the role or the relationship or the achievement that the false self was organized around, leaving in its absence a terrifying and ultimately liberating encounter with what was always underneath. For others it comes as a gradual and undramatic accumulation of honest moments, the quiet recognition, repeated often enough to become impossible to ignore, that something essential in you has been waiting for permission to speak that you have never quite granted. For many souls, the thinning of the veil begins with exactly the kind of ache we described in the introduction, the persistent sense that the life being lived and the life that was meant to be lived are not entirely the same thing. That ache is not a symptom of ingratitude or dissatisfaction or some private weakness of character. It is the essential self pressing against the veil. It is your Dharma announcing itself in the only language available to it, when the mind is too busy and the conditioning too loud for anything more subtle to be heard. The Sufi tradition describes this moment with a tenderness that the more analytical frameworks sometimes miss. They speak of the moment of yearning, the instant in which the soul, having spent perhaps many lifetimes in various configurations of forgetting, suddenly and without warning remembers that it is homesick, not for a place, for itself, for the state of being fully, completely, without apology or modification, what it most essentially is. That homesickness is the beginning of the end of Maya. And it is, in the Dharmic tradition, one of the most auspicious things that can happen to a human soul. What dissolves Maya? The ancient traditions are unanimous that Maya is not dissolved through more thinking. This is perhaps the most important practical teaching in this entire chapter, because the mind that has been shaped by Maya will naturally attempt to think its way out of the illusion. It will analyze, it will intellectualize, it will construct ever more sophisticated frameworks for understanding the false self. And in doing so, it will perpetuate the very thing it is attempting to dissolve. You cannot use the costume to remove the costume. What dissolves Maya is direct encounter with the essential self. And the pathways to that encounter are as varied as the souls that travel them. For some, it is contemplative practice, the sustained, disciplined turning of attention inward that the Vedic tradition called svadhyaya, self-study, and that every serious spiritual tradition in human history has recognized as the irreplaceable foundation of genuine self-knowledge. For others, it is the encounter with beauty, art, music, nature, the specific quality of presence that certain human beings carry, that produces, in moments of genuine contact, a temporary dissolution of the constructed self, and a glimpse of something underneath that feels startlingly, unmistakably real. For others still, it is service, the act of offering what one most genuinely has to give, without calculation or performance, and discovering in the giving that the giver is larger and more alive than the constructed self had allowed. What all of these pathways share is a common movement, away from the performance of self and toward the experience of self, away from the accumulated layers of what you were told you are, and toward the direct, unmediated, increasingly undeniable encounter with what you actually are. The Dharmic Law does not ask you to be perfect at this. It does not require the complete dissolution of Maya as a prerequisite for beginning to live in greater alignment with your essential nature. It asks only that you begin to distinguish with increasing honesty and increasing frequency between the voice of the constructed self and the voice of the essential one, between the choice made from fear and the choice made from genuine truth, between the life being performed and the life being lived. That distinction, practiced consistently and with compassion rather than judgment, is how Maya loses its grip. Not all at once, not dramatically, but with the steady, patient, irreversible momentum of a truth that has been waiting a very long time to be recognized and has finally begun to be. The gift, hidden inside the illusion. There is one final teaching about Maya that the Dharmic tradition returns to again and again, and it is one that surprises many people who encounter it for the first time. Maya was not a mistake. The constructed self, the borrowed life, the accumulated layers of conditioning and performance and adapted survival, none of it was wasted. Even the longest detour through illusion leaves the soul with something it could not have gained any other way. The specific quality of compassion that comes from having been lost. The particular depth of self-knowledge that only emerges from the sustained encounter with what you are not. The earned wisdom that distinguishes a soul that has genuinely struggled with its own nature from one that arrived at clarity without the friction of the search. The Vedic tradition taught that even Maya serves the evolution of consciousness, that the experience of forgetting who you are and finding your way back is not a failure of the system, it is part of the system. The soul that has worn the costume and recognized it as a costume has a relationship with its own essential nature that is qualitatively different, deeper, more embodied, more unshakable, from a soul that never had to fight for that recognition. Your detour through the borrowed life was not wasted time. It was preparation. The specific gifts the illusion revealed through contrast. The specific strengths the performance developed even while obscuring the essential self beneath it. The specific compassion that only a soul who has been lost can offer to the souls it will encounter who are still finding their way. All of it belongs. All of it was, in the precise and patient intelligence of the Dharmic Law, exactly what your particular soul needed to experience in order to be ready for what comes next. And what comes next is the question at the heart of the Dharmic tradition. If Maya is what covers your essential nature, what is that nature exactly? How does a soul begin to recognize, beneath all the years of conditioning and performance and borrowed identity, the specific, irreplaceable truth of what it actually is? That question leads us to the teaching at the very core of Dharmic wisdom. In the next chapter, we turn to the ancient concept of Svabhava, your own nature, and the precise, practical, and deeply liberating process of remembering what you were before the world told you who to be. Chapter 3. Svabhava. Remembering what you were before the world told you who to be. There is a moment that most people can recall if they are willing to look for it. Not a dramatic moment, not a peak experience or a spiritual awakening or a turning point of the kind that gets written about in memoirs. Something quieter than that. A moment, perhaps from childhood, perhaps more recent, when you were so completely absorbed in something that the usual noise of self-consciousness went silent. When the part of you that is always monitoring, always adjusting, always calculating how you are being perceived, simply stopped. And what remained, in that silence, was something so effortless, so unguarded, so unmistakably and completely you that it almost felt like a different person. Except it did not feel like a different person at all. It felt with a clarity that was almost startling, like the most real version of yourself you had ever been. That moment was not an accident. That was Svabhava. Your own nature, temporarily unobstructed, the essential self, surfacing through the gap in the performance. The truth of what you are showing itself in the only conditions under which it can show itself fully, the conditions of complete unself-conscious presence. And the Dharmic tradition's most fundamental claim is this: that moment was not an exception to who you are. It was the definition of who you are. Everything else, the monitoring, the adjusting, the performance, the careful management of how you are received, was the exception, the overlay, the Maya. What surfaced in that unguarded instant was not a temporary aberration of your usual self. It was your actual self, the one the Dharmic Law has always known, the one that existed before the shaping began and that exists still, beneath every layer of conditioning and construction, waiting not to be created but simply to be remembered. The ancient concept of Svabhava. The Sanskrit word Svabhava is composed of two roots, Sva, meaning one's own, and Bhava, meaning nature, being, or becoming. Together they form a concept that the Vedic tradition considered foundational to any genuine understanding of Dharma, the understanding that every soul has an irreducible essential nature that is prior to and independent of anything the world has done to it or said about it. Svabhava is not your personality. Personality is, in large part, a learned thing, a particular configuration of traits that emerged from the interaction between your essential nature and the specific environment you were born into. Your Svabhava is what was there before the personality formed. The raw, specific, irreplaceable quality of consciousness that your soul brought into this incarnation. The particular way you perceive, the specific quality of attention you carry, the unique combination of sensitivities and capacities that makes your engagement with the world recognizably, unmistakably, irreducibly yours. The Bhagavad Gita, perhaps the most concentrated expression of Dharmic wisdom in all of Sanskrit literature, returns to the concept of Svabhava again and again with a consistency that makes clear its centrality to the entire teaching. In one of its most quoted passages, Krishna tells the warrior Arjuna that it is better to fulfill one's own dharma imperfectly than to fulfill another's dharma perfectly. The word translated as one's own dharma is Svadharma, the dharma that belongs specifically to your Svabhava. the purpose that emerges directly from your essential nature. Not the purpose that looks most impressive, not the purpose that earns the most approval, the purpose that is most genuinely yours. This teaching was radical in its original context, and it remains radical now. Because the pressure to perform someone else's version of a meaningful life, whether that someone else is a parent, a culture, a religion, a social media feed, or the internalized voice of every authority figure who ever weighed in on who you should become, is not a modern invention. It is as old as human society. And the Vedic sages, observing the suffering it produced across generations of human beings who died having never fully lived, identified it as one of the primary obstacles to dharmic fulfillment and gave it a name. They called it paradharma, another's dharma, and they taught that the soul who spends a lifetime fulfilling paradharma, however successfully, however admirably, is a soul that has missed the specific and irreplaceable contribution it came here to make. The signature of your essential nature. The practical question that arises immediately from the concept of Svabhava is the one that most people who encounter this teaching are already asking before the theory is even finished. How do I know what my essential nature actually is? How do I distinguish between the voice of the genuine self and the voice of the constructed one, when the constructed one has been speaking so fluently and for so long that I can barely remember a time before it? The ancient traditions answer this question not with a personality assessment or a list of introspective exercises, though both have their place, but with a set of what might be called recognition markers, qualities of experience that signal the presence of Svabhava in operation. Signals that the essential nature is not merely being described, but actually being lived, however briefly, however partially, in this particular moment. The first marker is effortlessness. Not the effortlessness of laziness or avoidance, but the specific quality of effortlessness that accompanies activity that is in complete alignment with your essential nature. The ancient Chinese called it Wu Wei. The Vedic tradition called it sahaja, the natural, spontaneous expression of what you most deeply are. It is the experience of doing something that requires genuine skill, perhaps even extraordinary skill, and finding that the energy flows rather than drains, that the engagement replenishes rather than depletes, that hours pass in what feels like minutes, and you emerge not exhausted but somehow more alive than when you began. This is not the absence of effort. It is effort in complete alignment with nature, which feels from the inside entirely different from effort working against it. The second marker is disproportionate aliveness. There are things in your life, subjects, activities, modes of engagement, particular qualities of human connection, in the presence of which you become noticeably, measurably more alive, not more productive necessarily, not more disciplined or more focused in the way that a well-managed task produces discipline and focus, but more present, more lit, more fully inhabiting your own experience in a way that the rest of your life, by contrast, reveals itself to be only partially doing. Pay attention to what makes you disproportionately alive, not what you are good at, though there is often overlap, not what other people think you should care about. What makes you, without effort, without instruction, without anyone having to convince you of its importance, come fully awake. The third marker is the thing you cannot stop returning to. Svabhava expresses itself through persistence, the interest that keeps resurfacing no matter how many times the practical mind dismisses it. The question that returns across years and decades in different forms, but with the same essential orientation. The activity that you find yourself pulled back toward, even when there is no external reward for doing so, even when it produces no income and earns no approval and cannot be justified by any of the criteria the practical world recognizes as legitimate. The Dharmic tradition is unambiguous about what this persistence means. It is not nostalgia. It is not escapism. It is your essential nature identifying with a precision that exceeds the rational mind's capacity to comprehend, the specific channel through which your particular contribution to the world is designed to flow. The fourth marker, and perhaps the most subtle, is the quality of your recognition when you encounter your Svabhava expressed in someone else. There is a specific kind of resonance, not envy, not admiration exactly, though it may contain elements of both, that arises when you witness another person giving full expression to a quality that is also, at some essential level, yours. A quality of recognition that goes beyond appreciation into something more personal. Something that says not only that is beautiful, but that is something I know from the inside. That kind of recognition is Svabhava identifying itself through the mirror of another soul's expression. It is worth paying close attention to. What you loved before you were taught what to love. The most reliable excavation site for Svabhava is the period before the conditioning fully took hold. Not because childhood is always a time of uncomplicated authenticity, it rarely is, but because the interests and fascinations and modes of engagement that emerged before you had fully absorbed the world's instructions about what to want carry a specific quality of unmediated truth that later preferences, shaped as they are by so many layers of influence, do not always have. The Sufi tradition speaks of the fitra, the original uncorrupted nature with which every soul enters the world. The state of being before the accumulated weight of experience, expectation, and social formation begins its work. The ancient Taoist sages spoke of the uncarved block, the pu, the state of natural wholeness that exists before the chisel of culture begins to shape it into something more socially recognizable. In both traditions, the teaching is not that you should return to childhood, which is neither possible nor desirable. The teaching is that the original nature that expressed itself in childhood, before the shaping became total, carries information about the essential self that the more socialized adult version has often lost access to. What did you love before you were taught what to love? Not what were you good at, not what earned praise, not what was practical or appropriate or aligned with the expectations of the environment you were born into. What did you move toward with spontaneous, uncalculated, entirely self-motivated interest? What could you do for hours without noticing time passing? What questions kept you awake, not with anxiety, but with genuine, energized curiosity? What activities made you feel, even as a child who had not yet developed the vocabulary to articulate it, that you were doing exactly what you were made to do? Those things were not random. They were not the accidents of a particular childhood environment, though the environment shaped the forms they took. They were the earliest legible expressions of your Svabhava, your essential nature finding its first footholds in the physical world, reaching toward the specific channels through which it was designed to flow. And the extraordinary thing, the thing that the Dharmic tradition teaches with a confidence born of thousands of years of careful observation, is that those original orientations do not disappear under the weight of conditioning. They go quiet, they go underground, they learn to wait, but they do not change. The essential nature does not transform under social pressure. It only becomes more or less accessible, more or less expressed, more or less able to make itself heard above the noise of everything that was placed over it. The wound that points to the gift. There is a teaching within the Dharmic tradition that initially strikes many people as strange, and that reveals itself, upon sustained reflection, to be one of the most practically useful pieces of wisdom in the entire body of ancient knowledge about soul purpose. Your deepest wound and your greatest gift are almost always the same thing, approached from different directions. The area of your life that has produced the most sustained suffering. The specific quality of pain that has followed you across relationships, across circumstances, across every attempt to outrun it or resolve it or simply endure it until it loses its power, is not separate from your Svabhava. It is one of its most direct expressions. The specific sensitivity that makes you susceptible to a particular kind of wound is the same sensitivity that, directed outward in service, becomes the precise quality of perception or understanding or compassion that constitutes your most distinctive gift. The person who has suffered most from not being seen carries within that suffering the specific capacity to see others with a depth and a completeness that people who have never experienced that particular invisibility simply do not have access to. The person whose childhood required them to become exquisitely attuned to the emotional states of those around them carries within that learned hypervigilance the raw material of an extraordinary capacity for empathy and human understanding. The person who has spent years feeling fundamentally out of place in every conventional structure they were placed in carries within that outsider's perspective the specific angle of vision that produces original thought, disruptive creativity, and the kind of insight that only becomes available to those who have never been entirely absorbed by the consensus view. This is not a consolation prize. It is not the spiritual equivalent of every cloud has a silver lining. It is a precise structural observation about the relationship between Svabhava and experience. The soul does not incarnate into a random set of circumstances. It incarnates, as the Dharmic tradition consistently teaches, into the specific conditions most likely to develop the specific qualities most necessary for its particular contribution. And those conditions include, inevitably, the specific friction, the specific resistance, the specific pain that is the necessary counterpart of the specific gift. The wound is not an obstacle to your Dharma. In the precise and patient intelligence of the Dharmic Law, the wound is often the doorway. Svabhava and the people who reflected you back. There is another excavation site for essential nature that the ancient traditions consistently point to, and it is one that people often overlook because it requires a particular quality of honest attention to access. Think of the people in your life, across the full arc of your experience, from childhood to the present, who saw you most clearly, not the people who approved of you most consistently, though there may be overlap, not the people who were kindest to you or most supportive of the version of yourself you were presenting. The people who saw through the performance to something underneath it and reflected that something back to you with a specificity and an accuracy that was, when it happened, both exposing and deeply, inexplicably relieving. Those moments of being truly seen are not merely emotionally significant. They are epistemologically significant. They are moments in which your Svabhava was recognized by another consciousness and named, sometimes in words, sometimes simply in the quality of attention that person directed towards you, in a way that temporarily dissolved the constructed self and left you standing in the somewhat uncomfortable but undeniably alive space of being, without the protection of the performance, exactly what you are. What did those people see? What quality did they consistently reflect back? What did they name in you, across different contexts and different periods of your life, that carried the specific resonance of recognition rather than merely compliment? The answer to those questions is rarely far from the heart of your Svabhava. The Egyptian tradition understood this through the concept of the Ka, the individual soul's essential double, the perfect spiritual template of which the physical person was an expression. The Ka did not change across a lifetime. It did not adapt to circumstances or modify itself in response to social pressure. It remained, in the Egyptian understanding, the permanent and unchanging truth of what the soul was, the thing that the gods knew about you even when you had forgotten it yourself. To remember the Ka was, in Egyptian spiritual practice, the beginning of genuine wisdom, because you cannot fulfill your function in the cosmic order while you are mistaken about your own nature. And you cannot be mistaken about your own nature while the Ka, the essential self, is clearly before you. The practice of remembering. The Dharmic tradition does not present Svabhava as a mystery to be solved through the right combination of analysis and introspection. It presents it as a memory to be recovered through the practice of honest, sustained, compassionate attention to what is already present. what is already moving in you, what is already expressing itself, however quietly, however partially, through the gaps in the performance. The Sanskrit term svadhyaya, self-study, is one of the foundational practices of the Vedic path, and it is worth understanding precisely what it means, because it is not what the modern world typically means by self-reflection. Svadhyaya is not the analytical dissection of the self from a position of clinical distance. It is not the project of figuring yourself out through the application of increasingly sophisticated psychological frameworks. It is the practice of turning toward your own experience with the quality of attention you might bring to something genuinely sacred and genuinely mysterious. Attending to what arises, noticing what consistently surfaces, honoring what persists even when it is inconvenient, and gradually, through that quality of sustained, honest attention, allowing the signal of Svabhava to become audible above the noise of everything that has been placed over it. The Hermetic tradition offered a parallel practice through the injunction that has traveled across 2.5 millennia without losing a particle of its precision. Know thyself, not as a philosophical project, not as a psychological exercise, as the foundational act of a soul that is serious about living the life it actually came here to live. Because in the Hermetic understanding, as in the Vedic, as in the Buddhist, as in every tradition that has looked honestly and deeply at the nature of human purpose, the self that is known in this practice is not the constructed self. It is the essential one, the one that has always been there, the one that the Dharmic Law has always been trying to help you return to. You do not need to manufacture your Svabhava. You do not need to construct it from scratch or figure it out through the right sequence of decisions. It is already there. It has always been there. It has been making itself known through every moment of disproportionate aliveness, every persistent fascination, every experience of effortlessness that stood in sharp contrast to the effort of everything else, every instant of being truly seen by someone whose quality of attention you trusted. The practice is not creation, it is recognition. And recognition, the Dharmic tradition teaches, once it begins in earnest, tends to accelerate. Each honest acknowledgement of what you actually are makes the next one easier. Each choice to act from the essential self rather than the constructed one creates a precedent that the soul can return to. Each moment of living, however briefly, in genuine alignment with Svabhava carves the channel a little deeper through which your Dharma can begin, fully and without apology, to flow. When Svabhava meets the world, there is a moment that the ancient teachers describe across traditions with a consistency that suggests they were all pointing at the same real phenomenon. The moment when a soul that has been living at some distance from its essential nature begins, through whatever combination of crisis and inquiry and sustained honest attention, to close that distance, to move more deliberately, more consciously, more courageously in the direction of what it actually is. What happens in that moment is not always immediately comfortable. The world that was organized around the performed self does not automatically reorganize itself to accommodate the essential one. Relationships that were calibrated to the constructed version of you may find themselves disoriented by the emerging real one. Roles that fit the adapted self may begin to feel genuinely constraining in a way they never did before. Not because the roles have changed, but because you are no longer willing to make yourself small enough to inhabit them without cost. The Dharmic tradition does not promise that returning to Svabhava is painless. It promises that it is necessary, and it promises something else, something that every soul that has made this journey confirms from the inside with a certainty that no external evidence could produce or refute. That the life lived from the essential self, with all its uncertainties and its requirements and its inevitable demands, that you be more visible, more genuine, more fully yourself than the adapted self ever had to be, carries a quality of rightness, of aliveness, of being precisely in the place and the purpose you were always designed to occupy, that no amount of comfort in the wrong life could ever replicate. Your Svabhava has been waiting for you, with the patience of something that knows it cannot be permanently lost, with the constancy of a nature that does not change, no matter how long it has been covered, with the quiet, unwavering certainty of a truth that has always known, even in your longest seasons of forgetting, exactly what you are and exactly what you came here to do. The question is not whether your essential nature is still there. It is. The question is whether you are ready now, in this lifetime, with everything you have lived through and everything you have learned, to finally stop performing the borrowed life and start living the one that was always, from the very beginning, irreversibly yours. In the next chapter, we turn to the relationship between Svabhava and the accumulated record of your soul's journey across lifetimes. Because your essential nature did not emerge from nowhere. It was forged, shaped by experience across more chapters of existence than this single lifetime can contain. And understanding how your Dharma and your Karma are not two separate forces, but one single, precisely coordinated intelligence is what makes the Dharmic Law not merely a philosophy of purpose, but a complete map of the soul. Chapter 4, Dharma and Karma, the map and the journey. There is a question that arises sooner or later in every sincere engagement with the Dharmic Law. And it is a question that deserves to be answered with the same precision and the same depth that the ancient traditions brought to every other dimension of this teaching. If I have a Dharma, a specific, irreplaceable purpose encoded into the essential nature of my soul, then why is it so difficult to live? Why, if the universe has gone to the extraordinary lengths of assembling a particular consciousness with a particular set of gifts and placing it into a particular lifetime at a particular moment in history, does so much of that lifetime seem to be spent in confusion, in resistance, in circumstances that appear to be moving in precisely the wrong direction? Why does the path toward purpose feel, so much of the time, like anything but a clear path? The answer to that question requires understanding the relationship between two of the most significant forces in the entire landscape of cosmic law. Forces that are almost always discussed separately, as though they were independent systems operating in parallel, but which the deepest layers of the Dharmic tradition understood as something far more intimate than that. Dharma and Karma are not two separate laws. They are two dimensions of one single, precisely coordinated intelligence. Dharma is the map. Karma is the journey. And you cannot fully understand either one without understanding how completely, how intricately, and how purposefully they are designed to work together. Karma. What the modern world gets wrong. Before we can understand the relationship between Dharma and Karma, we need to clear away the version of Karma that the modern world has inherited and replace it with the one the ancient traditions actually taught. Because the popular understanding of Karma, the cosmic scoreboard, the universe's system of reward and punishment, the celestial ledger in which good deeds are credited and bad ones are debited, is not only incomplete, it is, in the most important respects, precisely backwards. The Sanskrit word karma means simply action, nothing more and nothing less. It does not inherently carry the weight of moral judgment. It does not imply punishment or reward. At its most fundamental level, karma is the law of cause and effect applied to the actions, intentions, and choices of a soul across the full arc of its existence. Every action generates a consequence. Every intention sends a frequency into the field. Every choice, however small, however seemingly inconsequential, adds an entry to the living record of the soul's journey and sets in motion a corresponding effect that the soul will, in one lifetime or another, encounter. The Vedic tradition identified three distinct layers of karmic operation that are essential to understanding why your life looks the way it does right now and what it has to do with the Dharma you came here to fulfill. The first layer is Sanchita karma, the accumulated karma of all previous lifetimes. This is the complete record of every cause your soul has ever set in motion across the entire history of its incarnations. Most of this karma remains dormant in any given lifetime, held in the field like seeds that have not yet found their season. but it forms the deep backdrop of your soul's journey. The full weight of everything that has been generated, everything that remains unresolved, and the overall trajectory of consciousness that those accumulated experiences have produced. The second layer is prarabdha karma, the portion of accumulated karma activated for resolution in this specific lifetime. Think of it as the curriculum your soul selected before incarnating. Not all of your karmic history is in play at once. The soul, in consultation with a wisdom that exceeds what the incarnating mind can fully access, draws from the accumulated record the specific threads most ripe for resolution in this particular chapter of its evolution. This is why certain themes feel so insistent in your life, why certain patterns repeat with a persistence that ordinary explanation cannot account for, why certain relationships carry a charge that feels older and deeper than the years you have known each other. These are the fingerprints of prarabdha karma, the specific curriculum this lifetime was assembled to address. The third layer is agami karma, the new karma being generated by the choices you make in this present moment. Every decision, every intention, every action you take right now is adding to the living record of your soul's journey. This is the layer over which you have the most immediate conscious influence. And it is the layer where the relationship between karma and dharma becomes most practically significant. Because the choices that generate the least additional karmic weight, the choices that accelerate rather than complicate your soul's journey toward fulfillment, are almost always the choices made in alignment with your dharma. How karma shapes the terrain of your dharmic journey. Here is where the relationship between dharma and karma becomes genuinely illuminating, and where the ancient teaching begins to make sense of things in your life that may have resisted explanation until now. Your dharma, the specific purpose your soul came here to fulfill, does not exist in a vacuum. It exists within a specific karmic context. The particular gifts you carry in this lifetime were shaped in part by the experiences of previous ones. The specific challenges you face on the path toward your purpose are not random obstacles placed between you and your destination. They are, in many cases, the precise karmic conditions most necessary for the development of the specific qualities your dharmic contribution requires. The soul that came here to offer deep, compassionate healing to others did not arrive carrying that gift fully formed, untested, and independent of experience. It arrived having lived across previous incarnations through the specific quality of suffering that makes genuine compassion, not the performance of compassion, not the concept of compassion, but the real thing, the kind that other suffering souls can feel from across a room. Possible. The karma is not separate from the dharma. The karma is what forged the instrument through which the dharma flows. The soul that came here to speak truth to power, to challenge structures that have outlived their purpose, to offer the specific quality of disruptive clarity that changes the direction of systems and conversations, and sometimes of history itself, did not arrive at that capacity through a comfortable journey. It arrived having accumulated, through lifetimes of navigating the specific tension between authenticity and conformity, the precise combination of courage and discernment and unshakable groundedness in its own perception that makes that particular form of contribution possible. The difficulty was the preparation. The karma was the curriculum. This is not to say that all suffering is purposeful in a simple or comfortable sense. The Dharmic tradition does not offer easy consolations, and it would be a distortion of the teaching to suggest that every painful experience can be neatly explained as karmic preparation for a Dharmic gift. The relationship is real and it is significant, but it operates with a complexity and a compassion that exceeds the reach of any simple formula. What the tradition does consistently teach is that nothing in the soul's journey is wasted. That the karmic experiences most likely to feel like obstacles to your purpose are often, viewed from the broader perspective that only time and honest reflection can provide, the very experiences that made the fulfillment of that purpose possible. The karmic blocks to dharmic fulfillment. There are specific ways in which unresolved karma consistently appears as obstruction on the path toward dharmic fulfillment. And recognizing these patterns, Not with judgment, but with the clear-eyed honesty that the Dharmic tradition consistently calls for, is one of the most practically useful things a soul can do in a lifetime oriented toward genuine purpose. The first and most common karmic block is the pattern of self-suppression. Across many lifetimes, souls accumulate experiences in which the full expression of their essential nature produced consequences that felt dangerous: rejection, persecution, loss of belonging, loss of safety, loss of love. The soul learns, through the lived embodied memory of those consequences, to manage its expression, to lead with the acceptable parts and conceal the threatening ones, to be smaller, safer, more palatable than its actual nature in order to maintain the connections and the security it needs to survive. This adaptation, which was genuinely necessary in the context that produced it, carries forward into lifetimes where the danger no longer exists, and it appears, in those subsequent lifetimes, as the specific and often mysterious resistance to full self-expression that so many people experience as an inexplicable ceiling on their own aliveness. The second karmic block is the wound of worthiness, the deep, often pre-verbal conviction that the self as it actually is, with its specific gifts, its specific desires, its specific quality of essential nature, is not quite enough, not quite deserving of the life that its dharma would require it to claim. This wound does not always announce itself directly. It is more often felt as a pattern of self-sabotage that appears with uncanny consistency at precisely the moments when genuine fulfillment is within reach. The opportunity declined at the last moment. The relationship that begins to feel too good to be sustainable and is unconsciously undermined. The creative work that is completed but never shared. The gift that is expressed in private and withheld from the world. The karmic tradition understands these patterns not as character flaws, but as the echoes of accumulated experience telling the soul a story about itself that is no longer true, if it ever was. The third karmic block is unresolved relational karma. The significant relationships of a lifetime, the ones that carry the greatest charge, the deepest complexity, and the most persistent emotional weight, are rarely straightforward in the karmic sense. They carry history. They carry the accumulated energy of previous encounters between souls who have traveled together across multiple chapters of existence, each time arriving in different configurations of relationship, but working through the same fundamental curriculum of mutual growth and karmic resolution. When that history is unresolved, when significant karmic energy between two souls remains unaddressed, unacknowledged, and unliberated, it can function as a powerful gravitational force, pulling the soul's attention and energy away from its dharmic path and into the endlessly recursive loop of the unfinished relational business. Dharma as the accelerant of karmic resolution. Here is the teaching that most fundamentally transforms the relationship between dharma and karma, from a source of confusion into a source of extraordinary clarity and practical power. Living in alignment with your dharma is the single most powerful accelerant of karmic resolution available to a human soul. This claim deserves to be understood carefully because it runs counter to the way most people think about both concepts. The common assumption is that karma must be worked through first, that the soul must somehow clear its karmic debts, resolve its accumulated patterns, heal its wounds, and dissolve its blocks before it can begin to fully inhabit its purpose. That purpose is the reward at the end of the healing journey rather than one of the most powerful engines of the healing itself. The ancient traditions invert this sequence entirely. They teach that dharmic action taken in genuine alignment with the soul's essential nature, in service of a contribution larger than personal gain, with the quality of consciousness that comes from being fully in contact with what you actually are, generates a specific quality of energy in the field that dissolves karmic accumulation with a speed and a completeness that years of avoidance and management and careful self-protection cannot approach. The Bhagavad Gita addresses this with a directness that has lost nothing across the centuries of translation. Krishna tells Arjuna that action performed in alignment with one's dharma, without attachment to the fruits of that action, without the grasping and the fear and the ego investment that characterize action taken from the constructed self, burns karma the way fire burns wood, not gradually, not partially, but completely at the root, leaving nothing behind that can regenerate into a future pattern. This is why the soul that begins, however imperfectly, to move more consistently in the direction of its genuine purpose, often reports that other areas of its life, areas that seemed stuck or blocked or resistant to every attempt at resolution, begin to shift in ways that had not seemed possible before. The movement toward Dharma creates a current in the field, and that current, once established, carries with it a quality of liberating momentum that extends well beyond the specific domain of purpose into the entire fabric of the soul's experience. Reading the karmic patterns in your life. The Dharmic tradition offers a specific and practically useful framework for beginning to read the karmic patterns in your own life, not as evidence of failure or punishment, but as the precise and compassionate intelligence of a field that is always, even in its most challenging expressions, working on behalf of your evolution. The first practice is the recognition of recurring themes. Not the surface events of your life, which vary enormously, but the deeper patterns that those surface events consistently embody. The specific quality of challenge that keeps presenting itself in different costumes across different domains of your experience. The particular lesson that seems to be waiting with inexhaustible patience in every significant relationship, every professional setback, every moment of unexpected loss or unexpected limitation. These recurring themes are not evidence of bad luck. They are the curriculum, the specific karmic material that this lifetime was assembled to address, and that your dharmic journey will, in one way or another, require you to move through. The second practice is the recognition of what drains versus what replenishes. Karma, that is aligned with Dharma, action taken in the direction of genuine purpose, has a recognizable energetic signature. It may be demanding. It may require real courage and real effort, and real willingness to be more exposed and more visible than the adapted self finds comfortable. But it does not drain in the way that action taken against one's essential nature consistently does. The exhaustion of dharmic effort is the clean exhaustion of genuine engagement. The exhaustion of adharmic effort, of living against one's nature, of pouring energy into directions that do not feed what is deepest in you, is a different quality of tired entirely. One that sleep does not adequately repair, and that accumulates over time into the specific kind of depletion that the soul recognizes, even when the mind resists the acknowledgement, as the cost of the wrong life. The third practice is honest attention to what the field appears to be consistently redirecting you away from and toward. The ancient traditions understood what modern quantum physics is beginning to confirm, that the field is not passive. It is responsive. It is not simply recording what you generate and reflecting it back mechanically. It is, in the Dharmic understanding, an intelligent medium that participates actively in the soul's evolution. And that participation includes the consistent, patient, sometimes frustrating experience of having certain paths remain closed no matter how much effort is applied to opening them, while other paths that may not have been sought, that may not fit the plan the adapted self had constructed, remain inexplicably, persistently open. Doors that will not open regardless of effort are not always evidence of insufficient trying. They are sometimes the field's most direct communication that this particular direction is not where the soul's next chapter of growth and contribution lies. And the door that opens easily, that requires effort, but not the specific grinding resistance of a direction that is fundamentally wrong, is worth paying attention to with a seriousness that the practical mind sometimes struggles to bring to what appears to be merely good fortune. The karmic gift of this particular lifetime. Every lifetime has a specific karmic character, a particular quality of challenge, a particular set of gifts made available, a particular constellation of circumstances and relationships, and historical moment that makes certain kinds of growth possible in this incarnation that would not have been possible in a different one. The Dharmic tradition teaches that the soul does not incarnate randomly into a particular body in a particular culture at a particular moment in history. It incarnates with extraordinary precision into the specific set of conditions most likely to produce the specific quality of growth and the specific form of contribution that its current stage of evolution requires. Which means that the circumstances of your life, not only the gifts but the limitations, not only the advantages but the specific challenges, not only the doors that opened easily, but the ones that remain persistently closed, are not arbitrary. They are the karmic terrain through which your dharmic journey was designed to move. The family you were born into with all its particular gifts and all its particular wounds. The culture that shaped your earliest understanding of what is possible and what is not. The historical moment you arrived in, with its specific crises and its specific opportunities, and its specific hunger for the particular quality of contribution that your soul came here to offer. None of it was accidental. All of it was, in the precise and patient intelligence of the Dharmic Law, operating in concert with the accumulated record of your soul's karmic history, exactly the terrain your particular soul needed to move through in order to become fully capable of doing what it came here to do. When karma and dharma converge, there are moments in a soul's journey, moments that those who have experienced them describe with a consistency across cultures and centuries that suggests they are pointing at the same real phenomenon, when karma and dharma converge. When the accumulated experience of the soul's journey and the essential nature it came here to express meet in a single moment of such complete alignment that the usual friction between circumstance and purpose simply disappears. These are the moments the Chinese tradition called Tianxi, the appointed time, the moment of perfect ripeness when the conditions assembled by karma and the direction pointed to by dharma arrive at the same coordinates simultaneously, and what was previously effortful becomes suddenly, almost startlingly, effortless. When the door that was previously closed opens not because you pushed harder, but because the field has finally assembled everything required for it to open. When the contribution that was previously only potential becomes suddenly, unmistakably, undeniably actual. The Vedic tradition described these moments through the concept of Rita, the cosmic order, the divine rhythm, the alignment of individual action with the larger pattern of which it is a part. To act in Rita was to act at precisely the right moment, in precisely the right direction, with precisely the right quality of consciousness. And to experience in doing so the specific quality of grace that the ancient world consistently associated with genuine dharmic fulfillment. You cannot force these moments. They cannot be manufactured through sheer will or strategic planning, or the anxious accumulation of the right credentials and the right connections and the right circumstances. But they can be prepared for. And the preparation is precisely what the Dharmic Law has been inviting you toward all along. The clearing of karmic obstruction through honest self-examination and genuine service. The deepening of contact with Svabhava through sustained, honest, compassionate attention to your own essential nature. The cultivation of the quality of consciousness that can recognize the appointed moment when it arrives and meet it not with hesitation or self-doubt, but with the full, unguarded, wholehearted engagement of a soul that has been getting ready for exactly this. The compassion at the heart of the karmic law. Before we leave this chapter and move forward into the specific practical dimensions of dharmic living, there is one more teaching that the ancient traditions return to with particular tenderness, and that this exploration of the relationship between karma and dharma would be incomplete without. The karmic law is not cold. It is not administered by a distant and indifferent cosmos that tallies your actions without knowledge of or care for the full context of your soul's journey. Beneath the precise architecture of cause and effect, the Dharmic tradition identifies something that can only be described as cosmic compassion, an intelligence within the field itself that understands, with a completeness no single human perspective can match, the full weight of what each soul carries, the accumulated experience of every lifetime it has lived, the specific courage it required to incarnate into the particular set of circumstances it chose, the genuine difficulty of the curriculum it assembled for itself before the veil of birth descended, and the memory of that choice temporarily dissolved. The field does not judge your karma. It does not withhold your dharma as punishment for karmic accumulation. It holds both with the patience of an intelligence that operates outside of time and that knows, with a certainty that extends beyond what any incarnating soul can access from within the limitations of a single lifetime, that every soul will find its way, that every karmic loop will eventually close, that every dharmic gift will eventually find its expression, that the journey, however long, however circuitous, however filled with the specific detours and delays and apparently wrong turns that constitute a human life in all its complexity, is always at its deepest level moving in the right direction. You are not behind. You are not too damaged by your karmic history to fulfill your dharma. You are not too late, too wounded, too far down a wrong path to find your way back to the purpose your soul came here to fulfill. The karmic tradition is unanimous on this point, across every lineage that has engaged with it with genuine depth and integrity. The field holds your dharma for you with a fidelity that does not diminish with time, does not expire with missed opportunities, and does not reassign your specific contribution to a more deserving candidate simply because you spent years or decades or multiple lifetimes finding your way to it. What is yours in the dharmic field cannot be taken. It can only be delayed by the distance between where you are and where your essential nature is calling you. And that distance, the ancient laws teach, is always ultimately within your power to close. In the next chapter, we turn from the cosmic architecture of dharma and karma to the specific, practical, lived experience of what it actually looks like to move your life into genuine alignment with your soul's purpose. The ancient traditions called this dharma in action. And it begins not with a dramatic reinvention of your entire existence, but with something far simpler, far more immediate, and far more available than most people realize. It begins with the next choice. Chapter 5. Dharma in Action, Living the Law in the Ordinary World. There is a particular kind of spiritual understanding that remains permanently incomplete. It is the kind that lives entirely in the mind. That can describe with eloquence and precision the nature of the soul, the architecture of cosmic law, the relationship between karma and purpose, and the ancient wisdom of traditions that have spent thousands of years mapping the territory of human meaning. And that has not yet found its way into the hands, into the choices, into the ordinary, unremarkable, relentlessly specific texture of a Monday morning. The Dharmic tradition has no patience for that kind of understanding, not because intellectual clarity is without value. It is the necessary foundation of everything that follows. But because the ancient teachers who preserved this wisdom across centuries of transmission understood something that the modern world's tendency to treat spiritual knowledge as a category of self-improvement content consistently misses. Dharma is not a concept to be understood. It is a life to be lived. And the distance between understanding your purpose and actually living it is not crossed through more understanding. It is crossed through action. Specific, embodied, sometimes uncomfortable, always consequential action taken in the direction of what you most essentially are. In the context of the actual life you are actually living, with the actual people, the actual resources, and the actual circumstances that are genuinely present right now. This chapter is about that crossing, not as an abstraction, as a practice. The misunderstanding of the grand gesture. Before we can talk about what Dharma in action actually looks like, we need to address the misunderstanding that stops more people from beginning than almost any other single obstacle. It is the belief, rarely stated directly but deeply embedded in the way most people think about purpose, that living your Dharma requires a grand gesture, a dramatic reinvention, A public declaration followed by the wholesale abandonment of everything that came before and its replacement with something visibly, unmistakably more aligned with the soul's truth. The belief that you cannot begin to live your Dharma until you have quit the job, ended the relationship, moved to a different city, completed the program, healed the wound, resolved the karma, and arrived at a state of readiness sufficiently complete to justify the leap. The ancient traditions are unanimous in their response to this belief, and their response is not gentle. The Bhagavad Gita does not tell Arjuna to wait until the conditions are perfect before fulfilling his dharma. It tells him to act now, in the situation he is actually in, with the tools he actually has, from the consciousness he can actually access in this moment. The Taoist tradition does not teach that Wu Wei, effortless action in alignment with one's nature, begins only after the river has been completely cleared of every obstacle. It teaches that the river finds its way by moving, by engaging with what is actually present, by allowing the intelligence of its own nature to navigate the terrain as it actually exists rather than as it might ideally be configured. Dharma in action does not begin with the grand gesture. It begins with the next choice, the very next one, the small, specific, entirely undramatic choice that is available to you right now, in this moment, in the life you are actually living. The choice to spend 30 minutes doing the thing that makes you most alive instead of the thing that is most comfortable. The choice to speak honestly in a conversation where the easier path is agreement. The choice to take seriously for the first time, or the 100th time, the persistent signal of your own essential nature, and to act on it, however incrementally, however imperfectly, however far from the fully realized vision of your dharmic life that action might seem. The river does not wait for perfect conditions to begin flowing. It begins with what is present, and what is present always in every life at every stage of the journey is the next choice. The three movements of dharmic action. The ancient traditions, across their considerable differences in cosmology and practice and cultural expression, consistently describe dharmic action as moving through three distinct but inseparable movements. Not sequential stages to be completed in order, but simultaneous orientations that, when held together, constitute the complete posture of a soul living in genuine alignment with its purpose. The first movement is turning inward. Every genuinely dharmic action begins not with an assessment of external opportunity, but with a moment, however brief, however practiced, however woven into the fabric of daily life, of genuine contact with the essential self. The Vedic tradition called this antaranga, the inner limb, the internal orientation that precedes and informs every external expression. It is the moment of honest checking in, not the performance of spiritual awareness, not the execution of a mindfulness protocol, but the actual unguarded question asked of the actual unguarded self. Is this choice coming from my genuine nature or from my fear? Is this direction aligned with what I actually am, or with what I have learned to perform? Is this action moving me toward the life my soul came here to live, or maintaining the comfort of the life I have constructed as a substitute? These questions do not require hours of meditation to answer honestly. They require honesty, which is both simpler and considerably more demanding than any meditation practice. Because the self that is asked honestly will answer honestly. And the answer is not always the one the adapted self finds convenient. The second movement is acting without attachment to outcome. This is the teaching at the absolute center of the Bhagavad Gita's understanding of dharmic action, and it is, simultaneously, the most misunderstood and the most liberating principle in the entire body of dharmic wisdom. Krishna's instruction to Arjuna, act without attachment to the fruits of action, is not, as it is sometimes interpreted, an instruction toward passivity or indifference. It is not the spiritual equivalent of not caring about results. It is something far more precise and far more powerful than that. It is the instruction to perform your dharmic action with such complete investment in the quality of the action itself. in the integrity, the presence, the genuine offering of what you most essentially have to give. That the outcome, whatever it turns out to be, does not determine the validity of the action. The musician who plays with complete presence and genuine offering has fulfilled their dharmic action, whether the audience is thousands or none. The healer who brings their full capacity for compassionate attention to the person in front of them has fulfilled their dharmic action, whether the healing is dramatic or modest or invisible to any external observer. The teacher who speaks from the deepest truth they have access to has fulfilled their dharmic action, whether one student receives the transmission or 1,000. Attachment to outcome is not a sign of caring deeply. It is a sign of the ego's investment in the action, the constructed self's need for the action to produce a specific result that confirms its worth, its competence, its deserving. And that investment, however understandable, however deeply human, introduces a distortion into the action that the field registers with precision. The action taken from genuine dharmic alignment carries a different frequency than the action taken from the need for a specific outcome. And the field, which responds to frequency rather than to content, responds to each accordingly. The third movement is offering the action in service. This is the dimension of dharmic action that distinguishes it most clearly from mere self-expression, and that connects it to the largest possible field of influence and meaning. The dharmic tradition teaches consistently that purpose fulfilled in isolation, the gift expressed only for the satisfaction of the giver, the talent developed only for personal pleasure, the contribution made without genuine orientation toward the benefit of others, is dharma only partially realized. The complete expression of dharmic action always moves outward, always makes contact with the world beyond the self, always carries, however quietly, however indirectly, the orientation of genuine service. This does not mean that every dharmic action must be explicitly philanthropic or visibly sacrificial. The carpenter who builds with genuine mastery and genuine care is offering in service. The parent who brings their complete presence to a conversation with their child is offering in service. The artist who creates from the deepest truth they can access without compromise, without calculation, without the self-censorship of the market or the audience's imagined preferences, is offering in service. Because genuine creative expression, offered fully and without dilution, is one of the most consistently and profoundly life-giving things one human being can offer to others. Service, in the dharmic understanding, is not about self-sacrifice. It is about the natural, inevitable outward movement of a gift that has found its genuine expression. Water does not sacrifice itself to nourish the ground it flows over. It simply moves in accordance with its nature. And in moving in accordance with its nature, it nourishes everything it touches. That is service. That is the third movement of dharmic action. And it is available in every domain of human life, in every moment, to every soul that has the clarity and the courage to offer what it most genuinely has. Dharma, in the domain of work. For most people, the domain of work is where the question of dharma feels most urgent and most unresolved, because work is where the soul spends the majority of its available waking hours, where the gap between the life being performed and the life that was meant to be lived is felt most consistently and most concretely, and where the practical pressures of income and security and the legitimate needs of the people who depend on you make the simple instruction to follow your purpose feel, in its most naive formulations, like advice designed for people with fewer constraints and more options than you actually have. The dharmic tradition does not ignore this tension. It addresses it directly. And the address begins with a distinction that the modern world's conflation of passion and purpose consistently obscures. Your dharma is not necessarily your job, and your job is not necessarily separate from your dharma. The relationship between the two is more nuanced, more contextual, and more responsive to the specific circumstances of a specific life at a specific stage of its evolution than any simple formula can capture. What the dharmic tradition teaches about work is not that you must immediately occupy the role that most visibly expresses your soul's purpose, abandoning everything else in pursuit of it. It teaches something more subtle and more immediately actionable than that. It teaches that dharmic quality can be brought to any work, that the specific way you engage with whatever you are doing, the quality of presence you bring, the genuine care you extend, the specific gifts of your essential nature that you allow to inform even the most apparently mundane task, is itself a form of dharmic expression, and that the soul that develops the practice of bringing dharmic quality to what is directly in front of it, regardless of how far that immediate reality is from the fully realized vision of its purpose, is developing precisely the quality of consciousness, the depth of presence, and the capacity for genuine offering that its dharmic contribution will ultimately require. This is not an instruction to accept limitation indefinitely. It is an instruction to begin where you are, to bring the quality of your essential nature fully to the work that is present while simultaneously, with patience and with courage, moving in the direction of the work that is most genuinely yours. The two are not mutually exclusive. In the dharmic understanding, they are complementary. The practice of genuine presence in the work directly in front of you is not a compromise of your purpose. It is, in a very real sense, the preparation for it. Dharma in the domain of relationship. The second domain in which dharmic action has its most immediate and most consequential expression is relationship. Because it is in relationship, in the specific, demanding, endlessly revealing encounter with other human beings, that the essential self is most directly tested, most clearly revealed, and most powerfully either expressed or suppressed. The Dharmic tradition understands relationship not as a domain separate from purpose, but as one of its primary theaters of expression. The specific quality you bring to your relationships, the depth of your listening, the honesty of your presence, the genuine quality of attention you extend to the people in your life, is not separate from your Dharma. In many cases, it is among its most direct expressions. There is a concept in the Vedic tradition called seva, selfless service, that is sometimes understood too narrowly as formal acts of charity or volunteering. In its deeper meaning, seva is any action offered to another from the space of genuine presence and genuine care, without the calculation of return, without the performance of generosity, without the ego's need to be seen giving. And the tradition teaches that seva, real seva, offered from the place of authentic presence rather than the need to be needed, is one of the most direct and most powerful expressions of dharmic action available in ordinary life. Every relationship in your life is an opportunity for this quality of offering, not the performance of care which the adapted self can produce indefinitely without ever making genuine contact with another soul, but the real thing, the quality of presence that says, "I see you." Not the version of you that is easiest to see, not the version that confirms what I already believe, not the version that fits the role I need you to occupy in the story I'm telling about my life, but you, as you actually are, in this moment, with everything you are carrying. That quality of genuine seeing, offered consistently, offered without agenda, offered from the space of a self that is sufficiently in contact with its own essential nature to extend that contact outward to another, is Dharma in its most intimate and most immediate form. Dharma in the domain of creativity. Every soul has a creative dimension. Not every soul expresses it through what the culture recognizes as art. But every soul has a specific way of bringing something into being that did not exist before. A way of solving, of connecting, of seeing, of making, of responding to the world's existing reality, with a contribution that adds something genuinely new to it. This is the creative dimension of Svabhava, and it is one of the most direct channels through which Dharma enters the world. The ancient Egyptian tradition understood creativity not as a human personality trait, but as a cosmic force. The concept of Heka, the divine creative power that animated all of existence, was understood to operate through human beings as well as through the gods. When a human being created from the deepest truth of their nature, they were not merely producing an artifact. They were participating in the ongoing act of cosmic creation. They were extending the Heka through their particular form of consciousness into the world, adding to the living fabric of reality something that only their specific quality of perception and expression could have contributed. This is why the suppression of genuine creative expression, the self-censorship of the gift, the calculation of what the market wants before the soul has been consulted about what it actually has to offer, the comparison that diminishes the specific value of your particular contribution by measuring it against the contributions of souls with entirely different natures and entirely different purposes, is not merely a personal loss. In the Dharmic understanding, it is a cosmic one. What your specific creative expression would have added to the world if fully offered is not added by anyone else, cannot be added by anyone else, because no one else carries the specific combination of perception, experience, sensitivity, and essential nature that would have produced it. The Dharmic instruction regarding creativity is therefore not find your creative passion. It is offer your specific creative gift, fully and without dilution, and trust that the world that needed it will find it. This requires a quality of courage that the adapted self, with its relentless monitoring of external response and its habitual subordination of genuine expression to anticipated reception, consistently struggles to sustain. It is the courage of the soul that has decided, firmly and finally, that the authentic offering of what it genuinely has is more important than the managed offering of what it calculates will be well received. The daily practice of Dharmic alignment. The ancient traditions that understood Dharmic law most deeply were not traditions that left its practice to inspiration, to particularly auspicious moments, or to the dramatic turning points that punctuate a life with their demand for clarity. They were traditions that embedded the practice of Dharmic alignment into the texture of daily life itself, into the quality of attention brought to the first moments of waking, into the orientation of consciousness before the day's demands took hold, into the small and repeating choices through which the accumulated direction of a life is actually determined. The Vedic tradition prescribed the practice of sankalpa, a conscious intention formed with clarity and held with sincerity that orients the soul's energy toward its genuine purpose before the momentum of habit and circumstance takes over. Not a goal in the modern sense of a specific measurable outcome to be achieved by a specific deadline, a direction, a quality, an orientation of will toward the essential nature and its most genuine expression, held lightly enough to allow the field its own intelligence in determining the specific form the fulfillment will take, but firmly enough to provide the consistency of direction that Dharmic action requires to accumulate into something real. The Sufi tradition embedded Dharmic practice in the cultivation of what they called presence, the quality of complete, undivided, fully inhabited attention to the reality of this moment, this encounter, this opportunity for genuine expression or genuine service. The Sufi masters understood that the soul that is fully present to what is actually happening right now, not managing it from behind the protection of the adapted self, not performing its response to it, not calculating the best strategic approach to it, but genuinely, nakedly, completely meeting it, is a soul that is, in that moment, fully living its Dharma. Because Dharma is not only expressed in the grand acts of obvious purpose, it is expressed in the quality of consciousness brought to every act, however small, however ordinary, however far from the center of what the soul has identified as its most significant contribution. The Hermetic tradition offered what may be the most practically precise instruction of all, as within, so without. The external expression of Dharma, the work, the relationships, the creative contribution, the service, will only ever be as genuine, as deep, and as aligned with the soul's essential nature as the internal reality from which it emerges. Which means that the daily practice of Dharmic alignment is, at its most fundamental level, a practice of internal honesty. The consistent, compassionate, increasingly precise attending to what is actually arising in you, what is actually true for you. what your essential nature is actually calling for, as opposed to what the adapted self finds safe, what the cultural conditioning finds acceptable, and what the fear finds manageable. That practice, sustained over time with patience and with the specific quality of self-compassion that the Dharmic tradition consistently emphasizes as a prerequisite for genuine self-knowledge, does not produce dramatic transformation overnight. It produces something more reliable and more permanent than dramatic transformation. It produces the slow, steady, irreversible accumulation of a life that is becoming, increment by increment, choice by choice, moment of honesty by moment of honesty, more genuinely itself. When dharmic action meets resistance, there is something that happens with the consistency that the dharmic tradition has documented across centuries of observation, when a soul begins to move more deliberately in the direction of its genuine purpose. Something that catches many sincere seekers off guard, because it is the last thing they expected the universe to offer in response to the act of finally, courageously, genuinely moving in the right direction. Resistance, not the dramatic resistance of obvious opposition, more often the subtle internal resistance of the parts of the self that have the most invested in the continuation of the familiar. The voice that says, "Not yet." The fear that presents itself as practical wisdom. The sudden proliferation of reasons why this particular moment is not quite the right one to take the step that has been waiting to be taken. The exhaustion that arrives precisely at the point where genuine momentum was beginning to build. The relationships that become unexpectedly complicated precisely when the soul is finding its clearest sense of direction. The Dharmic tradition does not interpret this resistance as a sign that the direction is wrong. It interprets it as a sign that the direction is real. Because the adapted self, the constructed identity that has organized itself around the performed life rather than the genuine one, does not resist directions that pose no genuine threat to its continuation. It resists the directions that do, and the direction of genuine dharmic alignment, by definition, poses the most genuine possible threat to the adapted self's dominance, because a soul living fully from its essential nature has, by definition, moved beyond the need to maintain the performance that the adapted self was constructed to sustain. The ancient traditions consistently teach that the appropriate response to this resistance is not to push through it with force, which tends to produce the specific kind of effortful, grinding progress that feels nothing like the wu-wei of genuine dharmic alignment. Nor is it to interpret the resistance as instruction to stop, which is what the fear that generates the resistance most desires. The appropriate response is to meet the resistance with the same quality of honest, compassionate attention that the dharmic practice brings to everything else. To ask with genuine curiosity rather than judgment, what is this resistance protecting? What does it believe is at risk? What quality of experience from the soul's history is it drawing on in its assessment of this situation? And what would it need to believe about the soul's capacity and the field's support and the genuine rightness of this direction to release its grip? The resistance, approached in this way, becomes not an obstacle to dharmic action, but a teacher within it. One more dimension of the soul's self-knowledge that the practice of genuine alignment makes available. One more layer of the essential self's history that the movement toward purpose brings to the surface, not to be fought, but to be understood, honored, and gently, persistently, compassionately moved beyond. The signature of a life in dharmic alignment. There are qualities that the ancient traditions consistently identify as the recognizable signature of a soul that is living, however imperfectly, however partially, however much still in process, in genuine alignment with its dharma, not as proof to be demonstrated to others, as internal markers. The felt experience of a soul that is moving in the right direction. The first quality is a specific kind of tiredness that is not depletion. The tiredness of complete engagement, of having given fully from what you genuinely have, of having been fully present and fully yourself in the encounters and the work and the creative expression of the day. This tiredness rests differently than the depletion of the misaligned life. It carries beneath it a quality of satisfaction that the depleted exhaustion of performing the wrong life never has. The body is tired, the soul is fed. The second quality is the increasing irrelevance of external validation, not indifference to others, which is neither possible nor desirable for a soul that understands its dharma as inherently relational, but a growing independence of the soul's sense of rightness from the need for external confirmation of it. The action taken from genuine dharmic alignment carries within it its own confirmation. The offering made from the deepest truth of what you are does not need the audience's applause to feel real. It was real before it was received. And the soul that has begun to feel that quality of self-confirming rightness in its actions has begun to access the specific freedom that the Dharmic tradition identifies as one of the most significant markers of genuine alignment. The third quality is the experience of meaningful coincidence. The ancient traditions across every lineage that has engaged with Dharmic law have noted the same phenomenon and described it with the same quality of wonder, that the soul, moving in genuine alignment with its purpose, begins to encounter, with increasing frequency and increasing specificity, the experience of the right thing appearing at the right moment, not through magic, not through the suspension of natural law, but through the precise responsiveness of a field that registers the frequency of dharmic alignment and reflects back toward it the people, the opportunities, the resources, and the encounters that resonate at the same frequency. The field is not passive, it participates. And its participation, in a life that is genuinely oriented toward its own soul's purpose, begins to express itself as what the Vedic tradition called Ritambhara Pragya, the mind in which the right thing spontaneously presents itself at the right moment. What the modern world calls synchronicity. What the Dharmic tradition recognizes as the field's most intimate form of confirmation that you are, finally and unmistakably, on your way. The fourth quality, and perhaps the most quietly radical of all, is the gradual dissolution of the question that opened this book. Not because the question has been answered and filed away, but because the life being lived has become, moment by moment, choice by choice, action by action, increasingly the answer. The soul that is living its dharma stops asking whether this is it, because it can feel, in the specific quality of aliveness that genuine alignment produces, that it is. Not perfectly, not completely, not in some final arrived, nothing left to discover sense, but really, genuinely, in the way that matters most, in the way the soul always knew, in its most honest and unguarded moments, that it was designed to feel. That is Dharma in action, not a destination, a direction, not a state of permanent arrival, a quality of continuous, conscious, ever-deepening movement toward the life that was always, from the very beginning, yours to live. In our final chapter, we arrive at the question that the entire arc of this teaching has been building toward. Not what is your Dharma, and not how do you live it, but what happens. To you, to the people around you, to the world that receives what you came here to offer. When you finally, fully, without reservation or apology, do. Chapter 6. The gift the world has been waiting for. Your Dharma and the collective. We have traveled far in this audiobook. We examined the ancient law that governs that signal, the Dharmic Law, precise and alive and operating in your life with or without your awareness of it. We looked honestly at the illusion that stands between most souls and their genuine purpose. We explored the essential nature that illusion conceals and the karmic journey that forged it. We turned the abstract into the practical and asked what it actually looks like in the texture of an ordinary life to begin moving more deliberately in the direction of what you most genuinely are. But there is a dimension of the Dharmic law that we have not yet fully entered. The one that the ancient traditions considered not the conclusion of the teaching, but its ultimate revelation. The understanding that transforms the question of personal purpose into something far larger, far more urgent, and far more consequential than any individual life can contain. Your Dharma is not only yours, it never was. The cosmic economy of gifts. The Vedic tradition preserved a teaching so quietly radical that it has taken thousands of years and the combined witness of every major wisdom tradition on earth to begin to be fully absorbed. It is this: the universe does not produce surplus souls. It does not assemble a specific quality of consciousness, load it with a specific configuration of gifts and wounds and hard-won wisdom, place it into a specific body at a specific moment in history, and then leave the contribution of that consciousness as optional, as nice to have, as something the soul can choose to express or suppress based on how comfortable it feels, how ready it judges itself to be, how favorably the response of the world appears to justify the risk. The cosmic economy in the Dharmic understanding operates with a precision that leaves no room for the concept of a dispensable gift. Every soul that incarnates does so because the specific quality of consciousness it carries is needed, not wanted, not appreciated, not welcome in certain contexts and redundant in others. Needed. In the way that a specific instrument is needed by an orchestra that was composed for exactly that instrument's particular timbre and range and no other. In the way that a specific thread is needed by a tapestry that was designed with that thread's particular color and texture as a structural element, not a decorative one. Remove it, and the whole is not merely diminished. The whole is, in some precise and irreplaceable way, incomplete. This is the teaching that the ancient Egyptians encoded in the myth of Ma'at, the cosmic order that required the contribution of every element of creation to maintain its integrity. The imbalance of Ma'at was not merely an individual problem, it was a cosmic one. The soul that withheld its genuine contribution did not simply fail itself. It introduced a specific and irreplaceable absence into the fabric of the collective reality. The Vedic tradition expressed the same understanding through the concept of the cosmic yajna, the great sacrifice, the universal offering in which every soul participates by fulfilling its essential function. To live your Dharma was not in this framework an act of personal fulfillment that happened to benefit others as a secondary consequence. It was an act of cosmic participation, the offering of your specific gift into the great fire of collective existence, without which the fire itself burns less completely, illuminates less fully, and warms with less of the specific quality of light that only your particular fuel could produce. What the world loses when you withhold your gift. There is a way of understanding the cost of unlived Dharma that goes beyond the personal, beyond the ache of the individual soul that spent a lifetime performing a borrowed identity rather than living its genuine one, beyond even the karmic implications of a gift deferred across multiple incarnations. A way of understanding that asks not what you lose when you withhold your Dharma, but what the world loses. And the answer, in the precise and uncompromising language of the Dharmic tradition, is specific, irreplaceable, permanent in its consequences within the time frame of this lifetime. The healing that only your specific quality of compassion could have offered is not offered by someone else. It is not offered in a different form, by a soul with a similar but not identical gift. It is simply not offered. The specific person who needed precisely what you carry, the specific quality of understanding, the specific angle of perception, the specific quality of creative expression, or courageous truth-telling or quiet, unshakable presence that only your particular combination of nature and experience and accumulated wisdom can produce, moves through their life without receiving it. This is not said to produce guilt. Guilt is not a dharmic concept, and it is not a useful response to this teaching. It is said to produce what the ancient traditions consistently identified as the most powerful single motivator for genuine dharmic action. Not ambition, not the desire for recognition or the fear of regret, but the specific quality of love that arises in a soul that has genuinely understood its own necessity. The love that says, not, I want to contribute, but I am needed. Not I would like to offer my gifts, but the world that is waiting for what I carry cannot receive it from anyone else. That love, the love of a soul that has understood its own irreplaceability, not as a source of ego, but as a source of obligation, is the most consistently reliable engine of sustained dharmic action that the ancient traditions ever identified. Because it does not depend on inspiration, which fluctuates. It does not depend on external validation, which is unreliable. It does not depend on perfect conditions which never arrive. It depends only on the understanding, held clearly and returned to consistently, that you are here because you are needed. And the need does not diminish because you are not yet ready to meet it. The ripple that reaches beyond what you can see. One of the most quietly devastating misconceptions about dharmic contribution is the belief that its significance can be measured by its visibility, that the gift which reaches thousands is more dharmic than the gift which reaches one, that the contribution which reshapes systems or movements or cultural conversations is more necessary than the contribution which reshapes a single conversation between two human beings at the precise moment when one of them needed exactly what the other had to offer. The dharmic tradition has never taught this. It has taught the opposite with a consistency that spans every lineage that has engaged with the concept of purpose at any depth. The butterfly effect, which modern chaos theory articulated in the 20th century, and which the ancient wisdom traditions understood intuitively thousands of years before the mathematics existed to describe it, operates with particular intimacy in the domain of dharmic contribution. The soul that offers its genuine gift, completely, without dilution, without the calculation of anticipated impact, sets in motion a sequence of consequences that extends infinitely beyond what that soul can observe or measure or even imagine from its position within the unfolding. The teacher whose single precisely offered insight changed the direction of a student's life did not witness the full consequence of that change, did not see the lives that student went on to touch, the work they went on to create, the understanding they went on to offer to others who offered it in turn to others still. The thread of genuine transmission that ran forward through decades and generations from a single moment of one soul fully expressing what it had to give to another soul that needed exactly that. The Vedic tradition understood this through the concept of parampara, the unbroken chain of transmission through which genuine wisdom travels across time, not from institution to institution or text to text, but from soul to soul, each one receiving what the preceding one had to offer at the precise moment of genuine readiness, and carrying it forward in the specific form that their own nature and their own experience and their own particular angle of understanding made possible. Every link in that chain is a soul that chose at the critical moment to offer fully what it had rather than withhold what it feared was insufficient. Every gap in the chain is a soul that chose otherwise. Your contribution, the specific quality of what you have to offer, expressed with full commitment and genuine presence in the contexts your life actually provides, is a link in chains you will never fully see, reaching people you will never meet, arriving at moments you will not be present for, doing work that begins where your visibility ends and continues with the specific momentum of a genuine gift, genuinely offered, into the indefinite future of a world that is always, in every generation, waiting for exactly what the souls of that generation came here to bring. Dharma and the turning point of the age. The ancient Vedic tradition understood time not as a linear progression, but as a vast cyclical movement through ages of consciousness that the tradition called yugas. Each yuga representing a different quality of collective human awareness, a different dominant relationship between individual souls and the larger whole of which they are a part, a different set of challenges and a different set of gifts available to the souls incarnating within it. The tradition identified the current era as a period of transition, a turning point between a yuga characterized by the dominance of separation, of individual ego operating in isolation from collective purpose, of the relentless prioritization of personal gain over communal well-being, of the progressive disconnection of human consciousness from the natural order it was always designed to participate in rather than exploit, and a yuga characterized by a different quality of consciousness altogether. One in which the understanding of individual purpose and collective responsibility are not experienced as competing values, but as expressions of the same fundamental truth. This transition does not happen through political systems or technological breakthroughs, though both may play their role in its unfolding. It happens through the accumulated choices of individual souls who, one by one, in the specific context of their specific lives, decide that the performed life is no longer sufficient, that the borrowed identity has been worn long enough, that the gift they came here to offer is more important than the comfort of withholding it, that the world on the other side of their genuine contribution is worth the vulnerability required to make it. Every soul that moves more fully into alignment with its Dharma is not merely fulfilling a personal destiny. It is participating in the largest possible act of collective evolution available to a human being in this era. It is adding its specific frequency to the accumulating resonance of a world that is, however painfully, however gradually, however much in the face of every force that would prefer the continuation of what has been, finding its way toward what it is capable of becoming. The ancient traditions did not preserve the Dharmic law across thousands of years because they believed individual souls would find it mildly useful for personal fulfillment. They preserved it because they understood, with the clarity of those who could see across vast stretches of time, that the healing of the collective always begins with the healing of the individual, that the world cannot move toward genuine order, genuine compassion, genuine wisdom, until the souls that constitute it move toward those qualities within themselves, and that the most direct path to those qualities for any individual soul has always been the same. The path of genuine alignment with what it actually is and what it actually came here to do. The relationship between your Dharma and others. There is a teaching that arises naturally at this point in the exploration of Dharmic law, and that deserves to be addressed directly because it is one of the most common sources of confusion among those who are genuinely trying to understand and live their purpose. If every soul has a specific and irreplaceable Dharma, does that mean every soul's Dharma is equally visible, equally dramatic, equally legible to the world as purposeful and significant? The answer is no. And the understanding of why not is essential to a genuine grasp of the Dharmic law in its full depth. The Dharmic tradition does not operate on a hierarchy of gifts. It does not recognize a scale of Dharmic significance on which the world historical contributions of famous souls outrank the quiet, consistent, entirely unwitnessed contributions of souls whose gifts expressed themselves in contexts that history does not record. The soul whose Dharma was to raise a child with a specific quality of unconditional presence that allowed that child to become fully themselves is not fulfilling a lesser Dharma than the soul whose purpose expressed itself on a public stage. The soul whose contribution was to hold a specific quality of peace in a specific community during a specific period of difficulty is not participating less meaningfully in the cosmic economy than the soul whose name is attached to the contribution in the historical record. The Dharmic law is not impressed by visibility. It is responsive to genuineness, to the complete, unhedged, fully committed offering of what is actually yours to give, in whatever form and at whatever scale the specific circumstances of your specific life make available. The question the field asks is not how many people witnessed your contribution. It is whether you gave what you came here to give, whether the specific quality of consciousness you carried into this lifetime found its genuine expression, whether the world that intersected with your life received what only your particular presence could have offered. And in relation to others' Dharma, the tradition is equally clear. The soul that is genuinely living its own Dharma does not experience the Dharma of another as competition, as comparison, or as a measure of its own adequacy. It experiences it as completion, as the recognition that the specific contribution another soul is making is precisely the contribution that its own nature is not designed to make, and that the world requires both. The reed flute does not compete with the drum. The river does not compete with the rain. Each fulfills its specific function within a whole that is precisely and only complete when every element is expressing its genuine nature, the Dharma you have already been living. Before we arrive at the conclusion of this teaching, there is something that needs to be said with particular care. Because the exploration of Dharmic law, its depth, its precision, its ancient authority, its insistence on the specific and irreplaceable nature of each soul's contribution, can produce in the sincere and serious soul that encounters it a particular and understandable response. The response of feeling that it has not yet begun, that the Dharmic life is somewhere ahead, waiting to be entered, and that what has come before, the detours, the compromises, the years spent in the borrowed identity, the gifts partially expressed and partially withheld, the purpose sensed but never fully claimed, does not count. Was not Dharma. Was the waiting room rather than the room itself. The ancient traditions correct this response with a gentleness and a precision that the teaching requires. You have already been living your Dharma. Imperfectly, partially, in the compromised and complicated and thoroughly human way that all Dharma is lived by souls still in the process of their own evolution, but living it nonetheless. In every moment of genuine care you extended to another person without calculation of return. In every instance of honest expression that cost you something but was offered anyway. In every creative act that came from a place deeper than strategy or approval seeking. In every time you were fully present to someone who needed exactly that quality of presence that only you, in that moment, could provide. The Dharmic law does not evaluate the totality of a soul's contribution only at the dramatic peaks of obvious purpose. It registers the entire texture of a life. Every ordinary moment in which the essential self broke through the performance, however briefly, however incompletely, and offered something genuine to the world that received it. All of that counts. All of it was, in the precise and compassionate intelligence of the field, already Dharmic expression, already the contribution the world needed, already the gift being given, in the imperfect and entirely sufficient way that genuine gifts are always given, not from a place of completion, but from a place of genuine intention and genuine presence and genuine offering of whatever is actually available to give in this moment. You did not need to wait until you were fully healed, fully aligned, fully certain of your purpose, and confident in your gifts before your presence in the world began to matter. It has always mattered. It matters now, and it will matter more completely, more fully, more in alignment with the specific contribution your soul assembled itself to make. As you continue, choice by choice, moment by moment, with the increasing honesty and the increasing courage that every genuine Dharmic journey cultivates in the souls that walk it, to live more completely as what you actually are. The world has been waiting. There is a final teaching that every tradition preserving the wisdom of Dharmic law arrives at eventually, not as a theological claim or a philosophical conclusion, but as the lived recognition of souls that have followed the thread of their own genuine nature, far enough to see what waits on the other side of the full commitment to it. The world has been waiting for what you carry. Not in a vague, generalized sense. Not in the sense that the world always benefits from people trying to be their best selves. In the specific, precise, irreplaceable sense that the contribution only your particular combination of nature and experience and hard-won wisdom can make has been absent from every context your life has touched, in which you were not fully expressing it. And that absence, invisible, unmeasurable, felt rather than seen, is real. Its cost is real. And its reversal, which begins the moment you decide with genuine conviction That the gift you carry is more important than the fear that has been managing its expression is equally real. The Vedic sages who first articulated the Dharmic Law were not offering a self-improvement philosophy. They were describing a cosmic reality. The Buddhist masters who preserved the teaching of individual purpose within the larger context of collective liberation were not speaking metaphorically. The Sufi mystics who wrote of the soul's unique and necessary place in the divine order were not being poetic. The Egyptian initiates who understood each soul's contribution as a structural element of Ma'at, the cosmic order without which reality itself becomes disordered, were not exaggerating for effect. They were all pointing from within their different languages and their different centuries and their different cultural frameworks at the same extraordinary world-altering, life-transforming truth. You are not here by accident. You are not here as an observer of a world that is being shaped by other more essential souls whose gifts are more necessary and whose presence is more required than yours. You are here as a participant, a necessary one, assembled with a precision that the universe does not waste on the dispensable, carrying a specific quality of consciousness, a specific configuration of gifts, a specific angle of perception and understanding and creative capacity and compassionate presence that the world cannot receive from any other source. The Dharmic Law has always known this about you, even in the seasons when you forgot it. Even in the years when the borrowed life felt so complete and so permanent that the essential self seemed more like a dream than a reality. Even in the moments of deepest doubt about whether what you carry is genuinely sufficient, genuinely needed, genuinely worth the vulnerability of offering without the guarantee of adequate reception. The field has held your Dharma for you through all of it, with the patience of an intelligence that exists outside of time and that knows with a certainty that no amount of human doubt can penetrate, that the moment of genuine offering always comes for every soul, that every gift, however long withheld, finds its way eventually into the world that was waiting for it, that the thread of genuine purpose, however tangled by the accumulated weight of the performed life, remains always intact at its core, always available to be picked up, always capable of leading the soul that is finally ready to follow it home. You are the answer. The question that opened this audiobook, the question beneath every other question that the human soul has ever asked about its own existence, was not really a question about purpose in the abstract. It was a question about you, specifically, irreplaceably, about whether the particular life you are living is the one your particular soul came here to live. The Dharmic Law answers that question not with a prescription or a program or a set of instructions to be followed until the correct life assembles itself around you. It answers it with a recognition. The recognition that you already carry everything required. That your essential nature, the Svabhava that existed before the world shaped you, and that persists beneath everything the world has placed over it, is not a starting point you need to reach. It is where you already are, at the deepest level of what you are, waiting not to be created but to be lived, not to be discovered somewhere outside yourself, but to be acknowledged, honored, and expressed without apology in the specific, limited, entirely sufficient context of the life you are actually living. The ancient keepers of dharmic wisdom, the Vedic rishis who saw the cosmic order whole, the Buddhist masters who understood the relationship between individual liberation and collective compassion, the Sufi mystics who wrote of the soul's irreplaceable place in the divine love, the Egyptian initiates who understood each soul's contribution as a structural necessity of cosmic order, the Hermetic philosophers who taught that the individual and the universal are not two different things, but one thing viewed from two different scales. They did not preserve this teaching across thousands of years because they believed it was interesting. They preserved it because they knew from the direct experience of souls that had followed the thread of their own genuine nature all the way to its source, that the world is genuinely different when a soul lives its Dharma. That the quality of reality in the context a dharmic soul inhabits is genuinely altered by its presence. That the people who encounter a soul living fully as what it is are genuinely touched, genuinely affected, genuinely changed in ways they may not always be able to articulate, but that they carry forward nonetheless into the lives of others, into the future of a world that is shaped by the accumulated quality of consciousness that moves through it. You came here to be part of that shaping, to add your specific frequency to the living resonance of a world that needs exactly what you carry, to close the specific gap that only your presence can close, to offer the specific gift that only your particular soul in all the vast expanse of incarnating consciousness was assembled to give. The Dharmic Law has always known you were capable of this. The field has always been ready to support it. The world has always been waiting to receive it. The only thing that was ever required was the choice, made once, and then made again in the next moment, and the next after that. The choice to stop performing the life that was expected and start living the one that was always, from the very beginning of your soul's existence, irreversibly and magnificently and completely yours. That choice is available to you right now. It has always been available to you. And the world that has been waiting for what you carry, with the same patience that the Dharmic Law brings to all things, with the same certainty that the field brings to every soul it knows to be necessary, is still waiting, with perfect faith, that you are already on your way. You just spent this time with one of the most ancient and most powerful laws ever recorded by the human soul. Do not let it stay in your headphones. Take one step today, however small, in the direction of what this teaching stirred in you. And if it moved you, pass it on. Leave a review. Share it with someone who is ready to stop performing the borrowed life and start living the real one. That act of sharing is itself a dharmic one.